Some of you have already met Ralph Nordstrom, and I had the pleasure of attending one of Ralph's webinars on photographing seascapes this past April, and I was really captivated by his presentation. And our program tonight is The Shoulders on Which We Stand, which is a program we've never really done before. So it's kind of exciting. And I would like to turn it over to Ralph, and he can tell us a little bit more about himself and about our program this evening. Ralph?
Well, let's just go ahead and let me grab the screen here, and let's just go ahead and get right started. Let's see, here we go. How's that? Perfect.
Yep.
Great.
Can I want to get rid of this, the stack of people here. There we go. Okay, good. I'm really excited to be with you guys tonight, and it's fun listening to you talk, and I'm impressed with all the wonderful things that you're doing and excitement you're having. So this is a real pleasure for me to be with you. I want to tell you why I created this presentation. I do workshops, and oftentimes I'll quote Edward Weston in a workshop. And sometimes I'll say, how many of you know who Edward Weston is? And the sad thing is I get a lot of blank stares. And so I thought, well, it's really important, I think, that we understand our heritage as far as those incredible photographers that paved the way for us back in the 1800s and 1900s. So that's how this got started. Let's see. Okay. Are you going to let me go to the next page? Here we go. So here's where the story begins. It begins in 1826 when Joseph, and I can't pronounce his last two names, so I will leave that up to you, when he made the first permanent photograph. He took a picture out of his studio of the street below. The only problem was he uses a form of tar for the light sensitive ingredient. So that wasn't going to go anywhere. So along comes 13 years later, along comes Louis Daguerre. And I'm sure you've all heard of the daguerreotypes. Well, this launched photography for sure. But daguerreotypes were not easy to use, although there were millions of them that were used in the 40 years that it was really popular, or actually more like 20 years. So here, I want to go over really quickly with how to do a daguerreotype. First of all, you start with a metal plate. Very often it was copper. And you coat one side of it with silver, pure silver. And you polish it and buff it so it shines like crazy. And then you sensitize the silver. And the way you do that, there's a group of atoms called halogens. And of that group, you've got chlorine, you know about that. You've got bromine, you know about that. You've also got fluorine and chlorine and iodine. And these are all extremely toxic chemicals. You know what? They used chlorine in the First World War. So you have to vaporize it and expose the silver to it. And the chlorine reacts, the halogen, they call them halogens, or halides, they react with the silver atoms and create silver halide, which is what we use in film today. Okay, so now it's sensitized. Now you can load it into your camera, and you can go out, take the photograph, and then come back into your darkroom, and now you need to develop it. And to develop the image, you need another nasty chemical, and that's mercury. And you heat up mercury, and you expose it to the latent image on the silver. And son of a gun, all the crystals that have been have been exposed to light, they turn to silver, and they turn back to silver. And the ones that haven't been exposed to light, well, they just stay the way they are. So now you got to get rid of the ones that haven't been exposed because they're still sensitive. So now you fix it with sodium thiosulfate, which is still used today in film photography to remove the unused crystals. Now then, the silver is kind of like a powder. And so to stabilize it, they use another metal, gold chloride, another thing, and they coat the surface with gold chloride, which stabilizes the silver. We're getting close. You can wash the plate at this point, and then put in a nice little mount so that people can display their daguerreotype on the coffee table or whatever. And guess what? You had to be a chemist to be a photographer. I just came across this the other day, and this shows you how complex. This is what a photographer needed to be able to make a daguerreotype. So anyway, the daguerreotype was, hold on just a second. Yeah, the daguerreotype was the first type of photograph that was actually available to the people. And if you wanted a portrait before this, well, you had to hire a painter. And so you'd have who knows how many days of sitting, 2, 3, maybe a week of sittings. Then the painter goes off and does his work, and then he comes back days and weeks and perhaps even months later with the final product. And of course, you have to pay for the painter for all these days. So it's very expensive. So the daguerreotype, you could go and sit down, and you perhaps even the same day, certainly the next day, you have your product and it's done. And so you don't have to pay as much. So it really opened up the market for photographers to do portraiture. But then even some of the people that could afford a painter said, why should we spend all this money? Well, we can get a daguerreotype. And so they started eating into the painter's business. And of course, they weren't too pleased about that. So here's a picture of a camera, a daguerreotype camera. It's really a camera obscura. Now, if you're not familiar with that, you probably are, but it has a hole in one end of the box, and the image is projected on the other end of the box. I'll take a little aside here. The largest camera obscura was made at El Toro Marine Base in Southern California when they were deactivating it, and they took one of the hangars there and made a camera obscura out of it, a little tiny hole in the door and a wall covered with paper. What was that? So anyway, here's how this worked. You got a little flap there. There is a little lens in that opening, and this is how this worked. But the painters, they decided they needed to do something about this threat to their business, and so they said, well, you know what? There's no way in the world you can create art from a mechanical device. It's just possible. You need human beings to create art. Well, the war was on. So the fundamental question was, can a mechanical device create art? And there was a painter that was kind of sympathetic to the photographer's position. He said, you know what? But your daguerreotypes, they have incredible detail, things that we can't possibly do as a painter. So if you made your photographs look like paintings, then gosh, paintings are art. Photographs that look like paintings would be art. And that started the pictorialist movement around the mid 1860s. So the idea of making a print or a photograph look like art was very, very big. So here's a brief look at pictorialism. Henry Peach Robinson, born in the UK, was really one of the big movers in establishing pictorialism as a method. And in 1869, he published a book called Pictorial Effects in Photography, Hints for Composition and Chiaroscuro for Photographers. Now, I know we all know about what composition is. We also have I'm sure some of you are very familiar with chiaroscuro, but the chiaroscuro, for those of you who may not be, is the use of light and dark in a print, an image. Painters were using it. It was developed in Italy, hence its Italian name. But painters like Rembrandt and Da Vinci and Vermeer and Goya, they were all using chiaroscuro. That was a big thing. So anyway, the book was helped to establish the pictorialist movement because Robinson spent almost as many pages looking at what painters were doing as he did about what photographers were doing. And his whole philosophy was, look at guys, painters have been developing these things for hundreds of years. It's only smart if we adopt them for photography. And so, so the pictorialist movement was off and running, and it was strong for the next 40 years. Now, the characteristics of pictorialism is you've got a soft focus. There's a lot of manipulation going on in the darkroom, both in the printing of the processing of the negative and the printing of the prints. When you got a print done, when you made the print, you weren't done, because most of the photographers were also giving it biochromate washes, and this was of different colors. What you'll see when I show you some examples is a sort of a sepia color, but blues and greens and different colors were used to wash the image. So it turns out that no two prints ever turned out the same. I like this definition of pictorialism because it really is what I'm trying to do, and I'm sure you're trying to do, and that's capturing imagination and interpretation in their photos. And imagination, you know, we can kind of think of that as creativity. Interpretation is something that we really can't control, because we see the world, each one of us sees the world in a unique way. And we're going to create photographs that reflect the way we see the world. That's what interpretation. We're not documenting the world. We are showing how we see the world. But I really like this last statement, that an aesthetic and poetic approach to reality. Again, we're not documenting the world. Mechanical devices do a wonderful at documenting the roads, the world, but we are interpreting and altering reality. So I want to show you a few photographs. This is Robinson's most famous photograph. It's got a very sentimental subject, which is characteristic of pictorialism. It's got the wash, the bichromate wash. It's got a soft focus. And this is all the stuff you can see. What I don't think any of you can see, I certainly can't see, is that Robinson used 5 negatives to create this photograph. Pretty amazing, huh? By the way, now here's Stieglitz, and Stieglitz is a main character in our story here, but this is one of his photographs. Now what he's got is a nice moody, well, it's a very clear mood that he has. Now, it was interesting, though, that he really worked hard to get this one. He took photograph after photograph after photograph, and then went into the dark room and worked on it and cropped it until he finally came up with this very, very pleasing composition. Now, this is Clarence H. White, and what we've got here is another soft focus, interesting light that kind of highlights the innocence of the girls, and these girls are playing in their playing their game. Again, the subjects are very interesting. This is Gertrude Casebeyer. All of these people that I'm showing, we're going to look at in detail. And this is one of her most iconic photographs, Blessed Art Thou Among Women. I'll just say briefly now, and we'll get it into more detail when I show it later. But she was very much an ambassador for women and motherhood. This photo, this one from Steichen, Edward Steichen, is probably the most important pictorialist photograph ever that was taken, and we'll get to that again later, and I'll explain to you why I consider it to be the most important. But this was two treatments with gum bichromate, one with blue and green. So I think it's worthwhile stopping now also and digressing and saying, okay, let's talk about how the technology of photography progressed. So starting with the daguerreotype in 1839, it was a while before before the wet plate was developed. And I'm showing the cameras that were used for those. Now, the wet plate was developed in 1851, and it was a plate of glass that was covered with collodion, which was a liquid. And the trick was you had to go in the dark room, spread collodion on one side of the glass, put it in your camera, go out and photograph whatever you're going to photograph, come back in and develop the image before the collodion dried out, hence the term wet place. Now, so imagine if you're out in the field photographing and you got to take a dark room with you. Well, 20 years later came along the dry plate, and instead of using collodion, they used gelatin, and it was pregnated with what else but silver halide crystals. And so now they were spreading this gelatin on a plate of glass, and they didn't have to be quite the chemist that they had to be to use a wet plate. They didn't have to make the collodion, they didn't have to make the jello. They could actually go and buy it. But there was a fellow by the name of George Eastman in 1988. George Eastman, well, he had bought a license to put the emulsion, the gelatin, on film. And he put it on strips of film that could be rolled up into a roll. And that strip of film that's rolled up could be put into a camera that you see there that had a key at the top that could advance the film, and it had a shutter, and that's all it had. This was the Kodak one. And so Eastman said, he had a great slogan, you press the button, we do the rest. So for $25, you could buy this camera that came with a roll of film in it that was good for 100 pictures. When you shot your 100 pictures, you send it to the Eastman Kodak facility in Richmond, New York, and they would develop the film. They would print the prints for you. They would put a fresh roll of film in it and send the whole thing back. So this really opened the possibility of taking photographs to anybody who had $25. The camera cost $25, and the film processing cost $25. And you didn't have to be a chemist anymore. Now, I love chemistry. I have a degree in chemistry, and I find that kind of a sad moment, but that's just me. Okay, so I want to introduce now the players in this drama of getting photography accepted as a fine art. So we have Henry Peach Robinson, and next I want to add to that Gertrude Casebeyer. Now she's a Midwest gal born in note this, Fort Des Moines. She was born there. She was like I already mentioned, she was a strong advocate for women and motherhood, and many people considered her the finest photographer of her time. So she's the first one. Then comes Alfred Stieglitz. Now, Stieglitz was born in Hoboken, and he was a driving force in establishing photography as an art. In fact, he was obsessed about it. He drove himself so hard that he had several mental relapses and had to get away from it all and just recover in New England. But he was also, if you wanted to make it in photography, he was the one you had to talk to. He was the most influential. And if you wanted to be recognized, talking with Stieglitz was what you wanted to do. The next one is Clarence H. White. He's another Midwesterner born in Ohio. He adapted pictorial photography and continued that throughout his entire career. But his trajectory was teaching. And he eventually established the Clarence H. White School of Photography. The other thing about his work was that he wasn't in New York with the New York gang and subject to their approach to pictorialism. He was in Ohio doing his own thing, and therefore his work was really quite unique compared to the New York bunch. Then we get to Edward Steichen. Now, Edward Steichen was not born in America. He was born in Luxembourg, but he came to America when he was 1 year old, and he did everything. This guy is utterly amazing. There's nothing he couldn't do. He did pictorialism. He was the go-to fashion photographer. He did documentary. He eventually became the photography curator at the New York Museum of Modern Art. Oh, and yeah, I skipped over that one. If there was a war, he was off and running into it. There wasn't a war he didn't like. Now here's Paul Strand. Paul Strand is also very interesting, born in New York, but he became an advocate of straight photography. We'll get into the details of that in just a little bit. But and he also did cinematography. He was involved in making some films, some of them pretty big ones. And I do want to mention one more thing about his upbringing. When he was going to elementary and middle school, he went to a private progressive school. And so his moral standing with regards to other people was he had a very deep concern and a passion for the more down and out people in the rougher parts of New York. So we'll see more about that. Now comes Imogene Cunningham. Boy, she is something. Look at that expression on her face, and that's exactly the kind of person she was. She would say anything, didn't care if it bothered you or not. She was born in Portland, Oregon, so she's a West Coast gal. She was famous for her photography of flowers, and the reason that was the case is because she got married and she had some kids, and so she had to stay home and take care of the kids. But she had a beautiful flower garden out in the backyard, so she photographed that flower, and I'm going to show you one of those photographs in a little bit, and it just blew me away when I saw it. This is a gal who never, if there's something new to learn, something new to try, she's all over it. But I'll tell you what Ansel Adams said of her. He said, Imogene Cunningham has acetic acid in her veins. Okay, another one of the girls who ended up being a West Coast girl, and she wasn't a West Coast girl. She was born in Hoboken, and Dorothea Lange. She suffered polio when she was a child, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But she became a documentary photographer. First of all, she did work on her own. Then she worked for the state of California. Then she worked for the federal government. And ultimately, she was a worker in Life magazine. So now we get to Edward Weston, the man that inspired this whole presentation. He was born in Illinois, but he moved to California at a pretty young age, well, young adult age, because his sister lived there. So he lived in the LA area. As he grew as a photographer, and believe me, there was a huge change from where he started and where he ended up. But where he ended up was when he photographed subjects, he was looking for their quintessence. He made a habit of writing every day into a day book. And for years and years and years, it was just a thing he did all the time. He ended up destroying most of the day book, but there's still a lot of it left, like 300 or 400 pages of it. And Aperture magazine publishes a day book, and it is an incredible read. You're reading the life of one of the greatest photographers. Now, the next one, you get 3 guesses, and the first 2 don't count, okay? Yeah, who else? Who else? So he was born in Fillmore District in San Francisco, and something that I learned about him as I was putting this together was the passion he had for the radio. In fact, he had aspirations to become a concert pianist. So I had to put this photograph of him in there. He was an ardent conservationist, not surprisingly, right? So this is our group of people. And what I want to do is I want to march through time, one decade at a time. And we're going to start at 1890. Now, what's going on in 1890 is, let's see, there's the Battle of Wounded Knee in this country, which was the last major battle with the Indians. And I didn't know this, but towards the end of 1890, well, early on into it, there was an economic panic, and they actually had a depression of their own way back then. So our cast is these 4 photographers. And I want to start out with, well, let's see what they're doing. Quesabar, now I had to put this in, this is actually 1889 instead of 1890, but she studied at the Pratt Institute. Now that was the world premier place to study for art. So Quesabar had a really, really strong foundation in art. Steichen studied painting and photography. In fact, at this point in his life, he was a little bit more interested in the painting than he was in the camera. White took up pictorialist photography. Again, he was self-taught, and again, he was under his own influence. So his works are rather unique. See, now, did I say something? Did I tell you that chemistry, then you had to be, photography, you had to be a chemist? Yeah, in 94, Quesabar goes to Dresden at the university there. There's a professor that specializes in photography, chemistry, and she studied with him. Stieglitz, he was born like in New York, in that area. His parents were German immigrants. And when he started going to school, his dad was not pleased with the school in New York. So he took his family back to Germany where they could get a proper education. And then he came back. He worked for his dad a little bit, but that wasn't very long. And there were two camera clubs in New York. Stieglitz joined them both. And he was not a person to sit back and just let things happen. He was the kind of person that make stuff happen come hell or high water. And he decided that it would be better if those two camera clubs were joined together, which he made happen. He got to happen, and that formed the Camera Club of New York. And they had a publication called Photo Notes, and he weaseled his way into editor of that. So he just didn't sit back. Now, Quesabuyer was in New York by now, and she saw the Buffalo Bill's Wild Best show and was really enthralled with the Indians. And so she contacted William Cody and said, "Can I photograph your Indians?" And this is one of the example. And I just amazed at these photographs when I look at them because they're so expressive. Now, I said I'd get back to this photograph, "Blessed art thou among women." And here's what we have here. It is pure pictorialism because you got the focus and stuff like that. But here's a mother consoling her little daughter. Her daughter's all dressed up, formal, standing real stiff. And I get the feeling that the daughter is about ready to go to school and is kind of afraid. And the mother is comforting her. Now, what's not so obvious, though, is there's a painting on the wall behind them. And the painting is the Annunciation of to Mary, the fact that she's going to bear the Christ child. So this is really a mother's scene, isn't it? Beautiful, isn't it? Now, Stieglitz, he traveled back and forth between New York and Europe, and one of his trips brought him to Italy. And here's just a wonderful, wonderful photograph. Again, soft focus, it's got a treatment, but it's such a heartwarming subject. The lady there had just told a joke, and some of the kids are laughing. I like the fact that two of the kids are sneaking a peek at Stieglitz himself. And there are a couple of older kids that are more they're beyond laughing at silly old jokes. But this is a beautiful little photograph. Now, White, I said he did things that were different. And here's a triptych. I haven't seen a triptych from any of the others, and I've looked at hundreds of their photographs. And the subject is not about people, it's about nature, spring. And the beautiful woman in the beautiful ground goes to enhance that story about spring. So he has his own way of doing things. Okay, on the West Coast, there's nothing to report yet. Things start to pick up the next decade. So let's move on to the next decade. This is going to be the 1900s, and William McKinley was assassinated and Theodore Roosevelt took over. That was in 1901. The African Americans had been released from slavery just about 35 years before, but things were still not going smooth for them. So let's start out with our here we go. Now we add Paul Strand to the picture here. We lost Robinson, but now we have Paul Strand. Let's see what's going on here. Oh, well, Stieglitz was not happy with the Camera Club of New York because it was too conventional, and they weren't interested in getting photography accepted as an art. So he seceded from that camera group and formed a photo secession group with hand-picked members. So Quesabuyer, White, and Steichen were all members. Strand was too young to join it at that time. And so he said, okay, we're going to have our own journal. And he was not only the editor, he was completely in charge of the journal that's called Camera Works. Boy, if you could get your hands on a copy of that today, that would be really something. Okay, what else is going on? Wow, Steichen created that famous photograph, the pond and midnight photograph that we'll show you. He created that during this time. Let's see what else. Stieglitz opened the little gallery of the photo secession. Steichen said to him, "Hey man, you need to have a gallery." And Stieglitz said, "I don't have the room." And Steichen said, "Well, there's an empty room across from my apartment in 291 Fifth Avenue." And that became the little gallery of the photo secession. All sorts of incredible things happened there, not just members of the photo secession, but other photographers, and not even stopping there, because Stieglitz ran exhibitions with the great, Europe was in a creative explosion. All kinds of new things were coming up. What an exciting time. And he brought them over to New York to be in the little gallery of the photo secession. He wanted to associate photography with the great art that was being created in Europe with the painters and the sculptors. Okay, Columbia University came to White and said, "Would you give us some lectures on photography?" And of course he said, yeah, I will, and that started his trajectory to be an educator. Then Rodin, this is an interesting story, so I've included it. Rodin was commissioned to create a statue of Balzac, and I will tell you about that in a little bit. Okay, so Casebar, portraits, at the time, no one did portraits better than Casebar. So Evelyn Nesbit, okay, does she look like a sweet little girl, or does she look like a handful? Definitely a handful. She was a chorus line girl. She danced. She did modeling. She aspired to be an actress, and she had two boyfriends. One was kind of a dirty jeans and dirty clothes kind of guy, and the other guy was more sophisticated. And she ended up marrying the worker guy, the laborer, and to make sure that he could keep her, he killed the other guy. So I think that knowing that story kind of fits in with her look. Now then there's Robert Henri, who was an American painter. And this photograph has absolutely, I mean, it looks like Rembrandt, doesn't it? It looks just like Rembrandt. And there's such talent, such skill that goes into making this chiaroscuro here. Everything is just perfect. The suit stands out from the background, just amazing. Okay, Stieglitz, this is his most famous photograph, the steerage. And he was getting ready to go to Europe and getting ready to shove off. And he saw this and he ran back into his stateroom and grabbed his camera and came and took this picture. And the museums say, "Oh, look at all the wonderful composition, and look at the diagonal lines and the smokestack and everything, the way he composed it. It was just fantastic." But what I see is a social situation. There are the upper class on the upper deck. They're all dressed up, fancy stuff. They got their great rooms. They've got restaurants with gourmet meals, and then down below is the steerage, and they're sleeping on mats on the floor and stuff like that. So there's a really big gap between those two social statuses. Now here's another White photograph. And again, it's a nature photograph. He's now talking about the orchard. We had spring, and now we have the harvest, and clearly a pictorialist. But there was a interesting thing, because Stieglitz and White were out having lunch, and somehow they started talking with two painters, and they got into an argument about can photography be art? And of course, the painters insisted, "There's no way, it's not possible." So Stieglitz and White, they got their heads together and said, "Let's do a joint project, and we're going to show these guys off. Let's photograph some nudes," and they did. and they went overboard and they've created art. Now, I always wonder if if they got a chance to see those two painters again and show them these paintings and say, Neener, Neener. Okay, now we get to Steichen's photograph. And this, like I said, well, what I didn't say was there were only 3 prints made of this photograph. And all 3 of them were different. Remember, I said the pictorialism when you were doing bichromate washes on the print, that you didn't end up with 2 prints that were the same. But both prints, all 3 prints were there. Two of them were in museums. One of the museum was New York Museum of Modern Art, MoMA. The other print, the 3rd print, was in a private collection, and eventually MoMA came to receive the private collection. I don't know if they bought it or if it was donated to them, but in 2006, they went to Sotheby's and they said, would you auction this for us? And of course, Sotheby's said, yes, we would. That one of the prints. They got $2.8 million for it. So that's gotta be a great painting, a great photograph. Very quickly, I want to go over the Balzac story. He was commissioned to create, Rodin was commissioned to create the statue. And when the people that commissioned saw it, they said, "Oh, we hate it. We're not going to pay you." Well, that word started spreading around, and Steichen heard about it, and he says, "I got to go over there." So he went over to Europe, and he had a friend who knew Rodin. He was kind of intimidated of Rodin, but he had a friend, and they became very close, Steichen and Rodin. And Rodin said, "Would you take a picture of the Balzac in moonlight?" And Steichen said, "Well, yes, of course." And that's the picture he produced. And when Rodin saw it, he said, "You will make the world understand my Balzac through your pictures." So Rodin was obviously very happy. So here's the West Coast now, and let's see what's going on there. Oh, yeah, Dorothea Lange contracts polio, and she limps for the rest of her life. And when she's photographing the struggling nature, the struggling part of society, that she seemed to think that turned out to be an advantage for her, because now she wasn't intimidated. She was limping up to them. And she made really good use of that. Let's see. Study picture. Now, Kesebaer is not the only one that goes to Dresden. Cunningham also, well, first of all, she goes up to University of Washington and takes a chemistry major. I was a chemistry major, so that's why I'm so excited about chemistry. She was a chemistry major, and she worked with the professor she worked with was photochemistry. And then she went to Dresden and studied in the same university with the same professor that Kesebaer had studied with. Ansel Adams now is still pretty small. In 1906, the great San Francisco earthquake. Well, Ansel had a wonderful dad. The things that I've read about his dad, I just admire him. And so after the initial shake, the dad took his family out in the backyard because of aftershakes. And he didn't want to put them at risk, so he'd take them out in the backyard. Well, Adams was walking around when an aftershock occurred, and it knocked him off his feet, and he landed on his face, and he broke his nose, and he had a broken nose for the rest of his life. Weston decided, he's running his gallery, doing portraits work and stuff like that. He said, but he decides, I really need to study photography. So he enrolled in the Illinois College of Photography in a 12-month course. And he went back there and he finished the course in 6 months. No big surprise there. And so when it came to pay up, he said, well, I'll give you half the tuition. They said, no, you're going to give us a full tuition. He said, no, I'm going to give you half the tuition because I only was here half the time. And they're going to say, no, you're going to give us the full tuition. And I think Weston decided, hey, I don't need a stupid diploma. I can get along without that just fine. Here's Cunningham's early pictorialist works, really, really beautiful stuff. And it's quite different from what she ends up doing at the end, but this is so tender, it's so simple, it's so heartwarming to see this. I just can't help smiling every time I see it. And then, of course, do you think she went to Dresden and left her camera at home? No way. And this is a great picture. I love the fact that it's after a rain and the pavement's all wet. The rest of them, we're still waiting on them. So we'll move forward to 1910. What's happening in 1910? The Titanic sank in 1912. World War I started in 1914. The men went off to work, and who ran the factories? The man in the factories? The women did, just like Rosie Riveter in World War II. And in 1918, World War II ends. So here we go. This is our cast of characters, still the same cast of characters on the East Coast. Let's see what's going on there. Okay, Clarence H. White established the Clarence H. White School of Photography. Great, now he's off and running. There's a war. There's not a war that Steichen didn't like, so he joined the army and was in Europe, in France. And he got into a position where he invented aerial reconnaissance. You got these biplanes, you got a pilot in the front seat and someone in the back seat. Just give the person in the back seat a camera, fly over enemy lines and take pictures of it. What a great idea. Let's see. Strand is now no longer a teenager. He is straight. He discovered straight photography. His idea is, look, you can't be an art by imitating another art form. You've got to stand on your own. And so he developed straight photography. And then he took some photographs to Stieglitz. And Stieglitz said, whoa, this is the true way to do photography. And pictorialism is an abomination. So anybody who does pictorialism from now on is an abomination. Well, you'll see just in a second that wasn't really a nice thing to do. Steichen over in France has a painting exhibition. He's been quite a painter from the beginning. But here's two abominations that went so far as to co-found the Pictorialist Photographers of America, which that organization is still in practice today. And this was the beginning of the end of the relationship between Stieglitz and Kiesebeyer and White. But Stieglitz, he's got some other distraction. He meets Georgia O'Keeffe, and they have a torrid relationship. Oh, just crazy. There were days when he didn't really get much done. They eventually got married several years later, and O'Keeffe finally, and at some point, moved back to her beloved New Mexico. Now we're starting out with Kiesebeyer again. And here's a family portrait. Now, the family portraits that I see going on today are all these pose things. You know, they're all standing in rows and they got their hands on it. Put your hand here, turn your head this way, this way. This looks so natural. It really captures the feeling, the essence of the family. And so I really like this. But this photograph is a commentary on Kiesebeyer's view on marriage and the role of the wife in the marriage. And that is yoked and muzzled. She did not like marriage. And she didn't stay with her husband. She had several daughters, though. Now, Stieglitz, Steichen, this is, when I first saw this photo, this is the only photograph I found for him from this decade. And when I first saw it, I thought, yeah, what's the big deal? The more I look at it, the more I just get drawn into it. And it is just amazing. See, 291, the building that was he had his gallery in, oh, he was still there, yeah. But he was so busy running the gallery and setting up exhibitions and printing and turning. He didn't have much time to photograph, so he just took a picture out the back. And I love this photograph. The more you look at it, the deeper you get drawn into it. It's got a really powerful magnetic pull. Then we get to Steichen. Steichen, I don't have any war pictures of him, but I do have a picture of Stieglitz. And it was very rare for Stieglitz to have a picture taken, and even more rare for him to smile. I love there's a little bit of hair out of place at the top. He's got this, I don't know how to describe that look on his face. And he's got a crooked necktie or bow tie. Yeah, but Ansel Adams actually did create a photograph of, must have caught him in a bad mood or a good mood. Anyway, he's got to create a photograph of Stieglitz actually smiling, which is very rare. Now, Strand, I got 3 photographs to show you that shows 3 different aspects of what he was doing. Here's an example of middle-class people walking back from work past the J.P. Morgan Bank. The J.P. Morgan Bank here, you just look at it, you feel power and strength and wealth. And here are common people walking by it. And so there's a social contact there. This is an example of the kind of work that he was doing in the lower parts, the less affluent parts of New York. And what he did, he wanted to photograph these people because he had a great admiration for them and a great concern for them. But he didn't want to know that them to know that they were being photographed. He didn't want to take advantage of them. So what he did is he rigged his camera with a fake lens on the side of it. And the real lenses, he could kind of cover up, kind of hide. And so he would stand looking at someone with a fake lens going this direction, where he is actually photographing someone to his right or someone to his left, and they didn't know it. And so he got honest photographs of them. Then this is the first abstract photograph that was ever taken. If it's first, or if it's not the first, it was almost the first. But this is where Strand is going with his photography, and this is the beginning of straight photography. And that straight photography, pictorialism had all this manipulation going on in the development. Straight photography is you took the image, you developed the negative, you made the print, and you're done. That's it. No manipulation whatsoever. Okay, East Coast, West Coast now. Let's see what's going on there. Weston meets Margaret Mather. Now, there were some wild parties in Los Angeles that Weston was attending, and he met Margaret Mather at one of these parties, and he found out that she was a photographer. And so he said, well, you want to come and work in my studio? And she said, yeah. And she started out as an aide and ended up as a co-worker with Weston. This was one of the few women that Weston did not have an affair with. He was well, anyway, moving on. He later on, Cunningham, when she described the two of them, said, Mather is the artist, Weston is a technician. And Weston, later on in his career, said, the most important person in my life is Margaret Mather. Speaking of Cunningham, she exhibited her work at the Brooklyn Institute of Art and Science. Now, I think finally we got here to 1913, when we see a show in an Institute of Art and Science, we're getting pretty close to photography being accepted as art. Lange actually took classes from Clarence White when he was lecturing at Columbia University. So she had a good start. Adams is 14 years old, and his dad gave him a camera for his 14th birthday. They also had a personal family friend who was a geologist. And the geologist took Ansel Adams and his camera, 14-year-old Adams, to Yosemite. And the first photographs he made of Yosemite was when he was 14. Wouldn't you just love to see those? But I haven't run across him yet. Lange wanted to tour around the world. She was really an amazing woman. And she and her girlfriend, they raised some money and they started heading out to the West across to the United States. And they got to San Francisco, and guess what? They got robbed. And so they were stuck there. And Lange finished the rest of her career there. Okay, look at Cunningham. I mean, how can a person have such an imagination? This was a reference to a 1894 fantasy novel written by William Morris of a scene in that. I'm just enthralled with her. Still waiting on the others. They're still too young. So now we get to the Roaring 20s. Roaring 20s. One of the things I didn't realize was that the radio was invented during that time. Maybe not invented is the right word. Broadcast stations were set up so that people could actually use the radio. And now people were sitting around, the family at night, sitting around this big 4-foot tall Motorola radio, listening to whatever. Only the shadow knows. I remember when I was about 6 or 7, my parents gave me a radio for Christmas, and we sat around listening to Red Skelton. Okay, so we still have a full contingency at on the East Coast, and let's see what they're up to. Okay, Steichen decides, forget painting. And what did he do? He burned his paintings. Can you believe that? Oh, well, Stieglitz begins to, this is very important. Stieglitz begins to photograph clouds, and he calls them equivalents, and I'll tell you why in just a minute or so. Guess what? Steichen becomes the chief photographer for Condé Nast. He is the go-to fashion photographer of his day. Now, this upsets Stieglitz enormously because Stieglitz, he's obsessive about creating art. And you don't create art for money, you create art for art. And Steichen was making tons of money. So this destroyed that relationship. Steichen was getting $65,000 a year. In 1923 dollars. In today's dollars, that would be over $1 million a year. He was to be not ignored. Let's see now. Strand, he starts doing freelance cinematography, and he's going to get involved in that. Let's see. Stieglitz opens the Intimate Gallery, and the thing is, 291 the building 291 got destroyed, got demolished. So it was without a gallery, and Strand, who really admired Steichen, I think, Stieglitz, he said, "Hey, I'll raise some money for you." And he raised $1,600 and gave it to Stieglitz. Well, I don't know if that bothered Stieglitz's ego or what, but that kind of soured that relationship. That's just the kind of guy he was. White had been working so hard in education with his school, but he didn't get a chance to do any photography. So that summer he said, "Why don't we go to summer of 25? Why don't we take a field trip to Mexico City?" And he did that so he could photograph. And the sad thing is, he got there and died of a heart attack. So we lose him. Quesavara has a major show in the Brooklyn Museum, but she is slowing down, and she's one of her daughters is helping her run the business. But she's definitely slowing down, and she closes the studio when the economy fell through. Okay, here's what they're talking about when you talk about equivalence. Steichen photographed this cloud, but he said this is not about the cloud. This is a photograph of what I was feeling at the time. So we go beyond the literal and go into the subjective. And he did this periodically, hit and miss now and then for many years, making more equivalent photographs. But this was his first one. Steichen is still doing really amazing things. There's this is the goat girl from I don't have my notes where what that was what he was in doing there, but he's got a dress that's really tight against her and flapping in the air behind her like flames. That's what he's talking about. But he photographs Gloria Swanson. Now, Gloria Swanson was one of the premier silent movie actors in her day. And look at that. I don't know about you, but I can't look into her eyes very long. It's just too intimidating. What an amazing photograph that one is. Okay, now Strand, he did some photographing up in Quebec, and the galleries that have this this photograph, they talk about the way he used light and dark, light being the sky and the reflection in the water, and dark being the rock. But the real is, I don't think Stein would have taken this photograph if it hadn't been for the workers in the lower right corner, because that's what he was championing the workers, and whether they're getting ready to take the boat out or whether they're putting it back, they're pulling it in. That's really the key part of this photograph. Now we get to the East Coast, and what's going on there? Well, let's see. Cunningham is changing, and she, at this point in her life, she said, no more pictorialism, and she moves into straight photography and all the variations that it has. Weston does the first of 2 trips into Mexico. He does 2 trips into Mexico pretty much back to back. He associates with some of the great artists in Mexico. Mexico had just got done going through a lot of turmoil, and it was finally settled down, and art just exploded. And so he became good friends with the Mexican artists. Let's see. Oh, and Adams. Did you know that Adams did pictorialism? I didn't until I started studying about this. But Adams did pictorialism too, and I got a photo to show you. Weston walked into a art gallery in Los Angeles, and he saw one of Cunningham's flower photos, and he was blown away. When I found that flowers in Wikipedia, I was blown away too. I understand totally why Weston was blown away. Adams created his first really signature photograph of the face of Half Dome. And so I'll show you that one, and we'll talk about that when we get to it. Weston, when he started his career, he said, you cannot make art from landscape photographies because it's just random chaos. And you can't make art out of random chaos. Well, he ended up with an assignment that took him to the Mojave Desert for a week or two. And he took one of his sons with him, probably Brett. I don't exactly remember. When he walked out of the desert, he said, "This is the best photography I have ever done." And now we have Lange. She started street photography in San Diego, but with her limp, and she's going into a difficult part. It's not San Diego, San Francisco. She's going into a difficult part of San Francisco. So her brother took her down, escorted her down just to be sort of protection. So here's Cunningham And that's the flower that Weston saw. Isn't that amazing? Oh my gosh, that is incredible. So, yeah, she just keeps on getting better and better and better, if that's possible. Then she also did modernist, what was called modernist photography, which is photographing the industry that was growing. Lange went to Arizona with her husband Maynard Dixon, who was a painter, painted Western style stuff, cowboys and Indians, stuff like that. He was going to Wallapai Mesa, which was where the Kobe, the Hopi lived, and of course Lange had her camera, and she took a picture of this Indian, and it started out being, head and shoulders, that sort of thing. But she kept on working with it and kept on cropping it and cropping it and cropping it until she finally got down to just his face. Man, that says a lot. Okay, Weston doing some modernist photography back in he was actually heading to New York to see Stieglitz, and he stopped in Ohio. Another one of his sisters was living there, and he photographed that. Now, how he got this printed, I don't know. But when he got to Stieglitz and showed it to Stieglitz was just amazed. He says, "This is wonderful stuff." So he really made a big impression on him. But catch this next one. This is the result of his influence that the Spanish Mexican artists had on him. Oh, I might get a message here. I hope not. Alexa, be quiet. Anyway, you say photographing toilets, what a weird thing to do. But here is where he really started getting into the subject that he was, the element that he was photographing to find its quintessence. That's where he starts using this. And another phrase that he commonly used, and other photographers did, was form follows function. And that was what he was doing with this stuff. I didn't put the bedpan. He had a photograph of a bedpan too. Okay, this is a pictorialist photograph from Ansel Adams himself. How about that? Pretty nice, isn't it? But this is the one that really is his first calling card. Monolith, the face of halftone. First of all, he had to carry his gear, 60 pounds of camera and gear and stuff, up 2,000 feet to get this angle. And he had six sheets of film. And he had gone through the first 4 and he still wasn't happy. And then he thought, this photograph would really benefit from a dark sky. And so he reached into his camera bag and pulled out the red filter and exposed the last 2 negatives. And this is the first time that he pre-visualized something. Big step. Okay, now we are in the 30s. Things are getting interesting. The Great Depression is on. Prohibition is on. I could say the Dust Bowl is going on. Bonnie and Clyde die in 1934, and Dillinger was killed by the FBI. That's interesting. 37, Disney released Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Whew, I remember seeing that. Not in 37, I wasn't born yet. And World War II began in 1933. So let's see what's going on here. We lost White, sadly. So what's going on here? Steichen took up delphiniums flowers, raising delphinium flowers. I guess he's made enough money he can sit back and do whatever he wants. What else is going on? Stieglitz is opening a new gallery. Yep. But we lose Quesabar. she's been slowing down, and now in 1934 we lose her. Strand is forming a group, helping to form a group called the Photo League. And their mission is to make photographs for to be used in progressive publications. So he's still following that track. If Steichen grows delphiniums and he photographs delphiniums, then you can bet your boots that he's going to have a show at MoMA of delphiniums. And Stieglitz's health begins to fail. Okay, so let's see Steichen's work. He was commissioned by Vanity Fair to photograph the Empire State Building. It was brand new. And so he actually made a double exposure. And his comment was, I conceived the building as a maypole to suggest the swirl of maypole dance. That's why I called it that. Moving on to Strand. Strand has actually developed some techniques doing cinematography, techniques for creating an illusion of depth. And here's an example of creating that illusion of depth. But it's also still just a very interesting, coherent, balanced, pleasing photograph, isn't it? Then he took a picture of this statue down in Mexico, and I think he may have had in mind that he was thinking about the suffering people that he admires so much. Southern California now. Let's see what's going on there. Weston starts photographing shells and plants. He had a painter friend, and she was photographing that, and he really liked her work. So he said, well, I want to do that too. Cunningham meets Martha Graham. Martha Graham, the great ballerina and the great put on most creative ballets. And you put these two incredibly creative people together, and you're going to get something spectacular. And then the group F-64 gets founded in 1932. Adams, Weston, Cunningham, and quite a few others. Lange photographs, she's got a lot of photographs that I really like, but this one is way up near the top of the list, and that is the White Angel bread line in San Francisco. She also starts working for the California State Emergency Relief Administration, which was put together. There were so many immigrants coming into California from the Dust Bowl. Actually, the farming in Central America or Middle America was pretty much destroyed, at least much of it, and they were coming to the Central Valley looking for work so they could feed their families. And this agency was responsible for trying to help them out. But she, of course, was a photographer for that. And then she made the most famous photograph from the Depression, and that was Migrant Mother. Let's see. Oh yeah, Adams becomes an advocate. He joins the Sierra Club. John Muir is the president, and they're trying to get Congress to establish Kings Canyon as a national park. And so he of course does the photography for that. Here's what Cunningham and Graham did. Isn't that amazing? Just what a contrast of energy and just sweet flowing motion, beauty. But here's her parent, Cunningham's parents. And if Cunningham was a bit abrasive, well, the apple doesn't fall very far from either of those trees, does it? Here's the photograph that Lange took that really blows me away. What what a photograph of just utter despair. Yeah, they're waiting in line for a loaf of bread or a heel of bread. And just look, this poor man, he's just, everything's gone. And then here's the favorite migrant mother photograph. And this is Weston's defining photograph. Yeah, this is pepper number 30. He blamed his kids for eating his models. Oh, he ate them himself. Yeah, he was. Someone teased him that he was a cannibal because he ate his own models. But anyway, this is one of his most important. And this again was under the influence of Mexican artists like Diego Rivera. The other thing that we have here is an abstract. Oceano is just north of Monterey, and he was out there taking abstracts of the dunes. I put this photograph in there because I've been there. It was the second day on a 7-day backpack through the Sierra, and we were 25 miles in from the cars. And I just came up the trail, and all of a sudden this lake came into view, and I said, I know this lake. So anyway, that's why it's there. This one I think is really unique from an Adams perspective because it's so different from what he does. As you would expect, everything's just perfect. The texture and the driftwood is perfect. The light on the rose is perfect. Although I do kind of sense the rose as being not delicate, but more like porcelain. But that's just my eyes. Okay. 1940s. Japanese bomb Pearl Harbor just 2 weeks after I'm born. The end of World War II in 45. Dad was on the USS Boston in Tokyo shortly after armistice. United Nations was established. Okay, we lost Quesabar, and now we're down to 3 on the eastern coast. And what are they up to? Well, Strand changes course here, and he says, I'm going to start publishing books. Hey, there's a war. What's Steichen going to do? He's only 63. He's going to join the Navy. I mean, it took him a little while to find somebody who recognized his value. He ended up commanding 200 or 300 photographers in the Pacific Theater. And his advice to them was, the first photographs you take satisfy the brass. The remainder of photographs you take satisfies yourself. Stieglitz suffered a stroke and was unconscious. And O'Keefe found out about it and rushed to New York and was by his side when he died. Okay, now 47. Steichen gets selected as the photography curator for the movie. This got a lot of photographers really upset because he displaced somebody that was doing a great job, but he'll prove for himself. There was a movie that Strand was involved in filming called Native Land. It was narrated by Paul Robeson, and it was very progressive, very critical of how I think probably African Americans are being treated. It was never aired in the United States, has never been aired. But it was eventually shown at an international film festival in Czechoslovakia. I looked it up on the internet. That movie is available, and I plan one of these days to watch it. I'm really curious. So this describes Steichen to a perfect T, but there's a war on, he's involved in it. Strand is continuing to photograph his neighbors in his neighborhood in Vermont. And this is a sugar house in which you make maple syrup. My brother has a sugar shack that he uses to make maple syrup. This is just a totally different photograph, but you see a man that's confident, you see a man that's self-reliant. You look at the house behind him and you know that he made that by his own hands. This is a man that's in charge of his life. Okay, so what's going on the West Coast? Let's see. Cunningham, there's just no slowing that woman down. She's starting to do street photography. Adams, with the help of Fred Archer, developed the zone system, which was just a major breakthrough in black and white photography. He also photographed moonrise over Fernandez. He got to include that in this presentation. Weston provided, Walt Whitman came to Weston and said, I'm going to do a new edition of my Leaves of Grass. Would you mind doing the photographs for it? And Weston said, yeah, I'd be more than happy to. The only restraint I have is that I have to have total artistic control. And Whitman said, yeah, no problem. So they went ahead and did the project, but when the publisher didn't know or didn't care, but he messed it up, and they messed it up, and Weston was furious. So Lange was working for the state of California the last decade. Now she's working for the federal government, and she's documenting the internment of Japanese into places like Manzanar. Since she's working for the federal government, they own the photographs. Not a one of them was shown in this country. Let's see. Yeah, Weston shows the first signs, the symptoms of Parkinson's disease. And Lange travels to Iceland doing a free thing for Life magazine. Cunningham was really into ham. So here's an example. We're going to pick up the pace a little bit because it's, and here she is just playing around. Really cool. Here's the reason why the government didn't show the photographs that Lange made of Manzanar and places like that. Ansel Adams also did work there, and then his photographs were more acceptable. During the war, just like in World War I and World War II, women took over in the factories. Richmond, Missouri was a shipyard, actually, and women were taking over there. But women got a new sense of themselves during the war, and they started to see themselves not as compliant, quiet, obedient spouses, but they started to see themselves as independent women, independent people. And there's this, Lange caught this argument between a woman and a man. She made sure that the man's face was in a shadow, so he wasn't his impression wasn't so strong. But I would say it looks like the woman is winning the argument here. Now, who else in the world could ever create a photograph of a mushroom like that but Weston? And he does a little bit more modernist photography. But this is the very last photograph Edward Weston took. And I have such an admiration for him that I had to put that in. Here's a photograph. I have an 8x10 of this signed by Ansel Adams hanging in our home. But it's a beautiful photograph. And look, symmetry does work. Here's another defining photograph for Adams, and that's clearing winter storm in Yosemite. He also photographed in New Mexico in Taos Pueblo. And of course, Moonrise over Hernandez. He made let me get caught up here. He made 1,300 prints of Moonrise over Hernandez. 1,300. Okay, we're moving on. 1950s. Okay. What's going on in the 50s? The Korean War begins. Supreme Court rules that segregation is unconstitutional. Rosa Parks rides in the front of the bus, and the Soviets launch Sputnik. Oh boy, do you remember those? Yeah, you do. Now we have two people left on the East Coast. McCarthyism is just really going full bore in America. And Strand says, you know, this country isn't big enough for McCarthy and me. So he left America and went to and settled down in France, where he would publish books, which is what he did. Now, Steichen, being photography curator at MoMA, he puts on the greatest exhibition that has ever been done. The Family of Man. There was a book that was available at the time, and I found a used copy of it, and it's just amazing. It goes from birth to death, and all of the things that we experience. But there's 503 photographs. Many of them some of them are made by the great photographers of the time, but many of them are just made by amateurs. But they come in from 68 different countries. It's just incredible. And the book, there's just so much emotion and so much feeling. And there'll be a quote at the end of this presentation that will clarify what he was thinking. But what he said about it at the time is, looking at the pictures, the people in the photographs look back at them. Yeah. Strand is photographing in the Hebrides, and he's getting ready for a book. Now, so he's going around photographing people, getting to know the traditions and the history and what makes them so proud. But here, look at this next photograph. It is so funny. I can't look at it without laughing. Yeah, that's just wonderful. Okay, he also starts working on a photograph in Egypt, on a book in Egypt, and so he's over there photographing it. He's also working on a book, well, no, that comes later. In the West Coast, what do we have going here? Photographed emerging social and cultural. There's just nothing that can stop her, which is wonderful. She's so great. Adams is a co-founder of Aperture Magazine. Lange joins the Life magazine staff. Adams conducted his first workshop in Yosemite. Wouldn't you love to do that? Weston knows that the end is coming, and so he, with his three sons, they put together the master set, several master sets of his works. But some of those are still in existence. Lange gets to travel to Asia. She'd always wanted to go to Asia. She gets to travel. Now she starts to finish her trip around the world right now with her husband. And we lose Weston. More Cunningham, amazing photographs. Look at that woman. Don't you know her? Yeah, don't you feel that you know her, that you see right into her soul? And then a blind sculptor, and here's Cunningham's interest in hands. She also took a self-portrait. And here's another hands photograph. Yeah, she just keeps on going, doesn't she? Lange is doing a photo study of three communities, three Mormon communities in the southwest corner of Utah. Here's one of her pictures. And another in which she emphasizes the hands. I put this in because it's so emotional. She was working with a defense attorney with this poor boy, and it didn't work out very well. Just such raw feelings. And I put this one in for Weston to let you know what Wildcat Hill was about. Okay. There's a couple of Adams photographs from that period of time. This one I just really love. It's so different. It's not a grand landscape, but it's so intricate, but everything's in balance. It's so coherent. And then these are always very, very special photographs. Okay, what's going on in the world now? Well, it's the 60s, and I'm sure we all remember that. Yep. And there's the Vietnam War protests are all over the place. Kennedy is assassinated in '63, and Martin Luther King gives his "I Have a Dream" speech. Well, let's see. We've only got two left on the East Coast. Let's see what they're up to. A retrospective for Steichen and MoMA. That makes sense. Strand publishes his Hebrides book. Steichen is awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom by Lyndon Johnson, and Strand publishes his Egypt book. Steichen is doing his own photography for his own self, and it's pretty esoteric, I think. Strand is working on books, and now he's working on Morocco. And then he turns his attention to Ghana. On the West Coast, Cunningham is awarded the honorary doctorate at a school where she taught once. We lose Lange to cancer in this decade. And Adams receives from the Department of Interior the Conservation Service Award. Yeah, that's kind of obvious, isn't it? Okay, so look at that. You just know these women, don't you? And what imagination. Here's Lange's work in Egypt. And here's Adam's work. I have an 8x10 of that one too, with Adam's signature on it, hanging on my wall. And I put this one in because it just goes to show you that you can create sunsets without color in black and white. Okay, now we're up to the 70s, sex, drug, and rock and roll. 1976, Viking spacecraft landing on Mars. In 1975, Vietnam War ended. So we still have these two in the East Coast, but we lose Steichen. Yeah. Strand gets one more book published before we lose him as well. Here's a sample of Strand's work in those last days, very abstract. We have Cunningham and Adams on the West Coast, and Cunningham publishes her book that covers pretty much all of her career, 1910 to 1973. She also finishes work on a book that's not published until after she dies, called After 90. And the reason she did that is because she herself is after 90. And she dies in San Francisco at the age of 93. Adams, he's co-founded the Center for Creative Photography at the University of Arizona. And that university has just a huge amount of great photographers' works. And Jimmy Carter's, it was a tradition for a president to get a painting portrait. But Jimmy Carter went further and said, I also want an official photographic portrait. Cunningham's last works, the little guy down there, just always pushing the limit. Adams' works, and there's Jimmy Carter. And now we're up to 1980. And IBM introduced the first personal computer. I'd already had mine for 3 years by the time that came out. Space shuttle Challenger exploded, and the Berlin Wall began to fall. So we've lost all of the characters in our play, but as Adams. He received the Presidential Medal of Freedom from Jimmy Carter. When Nixon came into the office, he appointed James Watt as Secretary of State. Watt was not a person to nurture the national park system. In fact, he was more of a person to just let it go. And that Adams, of course, was furious. And then in '84, we lose Adams to cardiovascular. So what legacy have these folks lived? And we're just wrapping it up now. What legacy did these folks have? Well, I want to give it to you in their own words. So let's start with Kesa Bayer. I am now a mother and a grandmother. My children and their children have been my closest thought. But from the first day of dawning individuality, I have longed unceasingly to make the pictures of people, to make likenesses that are biologies, to bring out in each photograph the essential temperament that is called soul, humanity. Stieglitz, it is not art in the professionalized sense about which I care, but that which is created sacredly as a result of a deep inner experience with all of oneself, and that becomes art over time. White. I think the greatest weakness of the young worker is the lack of something to express. He is too much interested in the photograph for the sake of the photograph alone. That is, in the medium or in the taking of the photograph itself. The photograph should express something. Steichen. When I first became interested in photography, I thought it was the whole cheese. My idea was to have had it recognized as one of the fine arts. Today, I don't give a hoot in hell about it. The mission of photography is to explain man to man and each man to himself. And that is no mean function. Strand. I photographed these people on New York streets because I felt they were all people whom life had battered into some sort of extraordinary interest and, in a way, nobility. A woman said to me when she sat down, "You're photographing the wrong side of my face." And I said, "Oh, is there one?" "I don't talk about success. I don't know what it is. Just wait till I'm dead." You know, so often it's just sticking around and being there, remaining there, and not swooping out in a cloud of dust, sitting down on the ground with people, letting children look at your camera with their dirty, grimy little hands and touching their fingers on your lens, and you just let them, because you know that if you will behave in a generous manner, you're apt to receive it too, you know. One does not think during creative work any more than one thinks when driving a car. But one has a background of years, learning, unlearning, success, failure, dreaming, thinking, experience, it all. Then the moment of creation, the focusing of all into the moment. So I can make, without thought, 15 carefully composed negatives, one every 15 minutes, given material with as much possibilities. But there is all the eyes have seen in this life to influence me. Adams. I tried to keep both arts alive, concert pianist and landscape photographer, but the camera won. I found that while the camera does not express the soul, perhaps a photograph can. Okay, we're almost done. I have one last little summary of the legacy that we have from them. So I'll just give this, I'll let you read it. Okay, well, that's it. That's it. If you want to take a screenshot of this, I'll hang this up for a little bit longer. I'm going to explain, the next page is going to be some information about, well, let's go ahead. There's some information about getting a book for this book, a copy of the handout. I have a handout available, and we covered a lot of data, and the handout can link you to the blog posts that I wrote for each and every one of these, as well as a few more great photographers like Henri Cartier, if we've seen. Yeah. So anyway, my email, just send me an email address. Send me an email at ralph@ralphnordstromphotography.com. I'll be happy to do that. I also lead workshops. I think I mentioned that already. And I would be so delighted if you would join me. I have one coming up in October, November, and starting in Bryce Canyon and ending up in Zion. They call it the Super Utah Workshop. And I'll be really happy to give you a 15% discount. And finally, there was the blog posts that, like I said, they have a blog post for every one of these characters, plus a few others, and they're on my website. So just go in. You can go into the Ralph Nordstrom Photography and click on blog, or you can put it in WordPress. But either way, you get to the homepage and then just search for the names. So I just have really enjoyed spending this time with you. And I hope we can meet down the road somewhere.
This was wonderful, Ralph.
Fantastic. Thank
so
you
much.
Oh my
so
goodness.
much.
Yeah, very good.
Yeah.
I
was-
love the way you presented it, the way
Well,
you put it together as a
The
group.
timeline, yeah.
Oh, great timeline.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, yeah,
I learned so much. My gosh, I didn't know any of these people except for two.
yeah.
It was great. Thank you. It was very
Well,
inspiring.
I'll tell
Thank
you
you
that
very much. Yes.
two people that were new to me were, of course, Gertrude Casebeyer and Clarence H. Thomas. Everyone else I was aware of. And there's still a lot more. This could go on all night long, couldn't it?
Oh my God.
Oh my goodness, yes.
I felt sad.
I'm blessed to have from my parents 5 US camera books that I grew up with, which were, I guess they weren't the precursor to Family of Man, but they probably came in the same period.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I have the book.
I do too.
The book.
And the day books of Edward Weston too.
Oh, you do?
Yeah.
Yeah, so do I. Mine's falling apart.
I felt sad as we lost each one.
Yeah.
No, yeah,
Really marvelous.
they're
program.
all
So what do you
amazing.
think of the day book? What is it worth a read? The day
Oh,
book?
gosh, it's wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you want to, I mean, he gave his life to photography, and he was at times desperately poor and just had to trust that something would happen. The next day, something would happen. And it always did. It was just amazing.
Yeah, Adams was a good friend, of course, and in Weston, Adams was just making money hand over fist. And he published My Camera in Yosemite, and he suggested to Weston, it was so successful, he suggested, why don't you publish My Camera on Point Reyes? No, Point Lobos, wrong point. And he put it together and it didn't sell.
Huh.
And now try to get your hands on one of those.
Wow.
You know, he has there's still a Western gallery in Carmel, right? On Ocean Street.
Mm.
There's still a Western gallery in Carmel. Make a little field trip down to Carmel.
There you go.
That sounds good
Yeah,
They do down there.
to tell
Yeah.
Tony.
Yeah.
yeah. Well, you are a delightful group of people. I really am happy for you, for the wonderful organization you have, the great friends you have. You really, really have a wonderful thing going.
We
Wish
love
I
it.
could get to Santa Rosa and say hi to y'all.
That'd be great.
Absolutely.
Wonderful.
Come on over. Do a workshop out here.
Well, if you cover my expenses, it's 2 days of driving each way.
Oh.
Hotels.
Where do you live, Ralph?
I live in Windsor, Colorado now,
Oh, okay.
as of February of this year.
Huh. I live
February,
in Windsor, California.
pardon?
I live in Windsor, California.
In Southern California, in Orange
No.
County.
Windsor.
I live in Windsor, California.
Oh,
Didn't you
Windsor-
say Windsor,
did I
Colorado?
say California? Yeah, Windsor, Colorado.
No, we have a Windsor, California also.
Okay, where is it?
It's where I
Near Rosa. About an hour north of San Francisco.
Okay. Oh, yeah, it's a winery. There's a winery there.
I mean, they're
It's a
everywhere.
winery everywhere.
100 wineries.
A few
Yeah.
hundred.
Napa,
That's
Sonoma,
unique,
Santa
right? That makes it really special. No, but there, yeah, I know. Okay. That's
You have,
what.
you have
what's
a
the
big
next time
Sur
north-
workshop.
I do. I'd like to do that again in January.
Oh.
This year, forget it. The road was
Yeah.
Wasn't open. I think it's open.
Terrible.
No, it was supposed to get open this month, but.
I graduated Pacific Grove.
Uh-huh. Oh, uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Took a drama class with Cole.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Yeah. Oh, boy.
And he was everything you said.
So what was that?
The reputation of his father went on to his sons.
Oh, yeah. 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 Pass it down. Same, yeah, same thing with Weston. And well, yeah, Weston. Okay,
Well,
well.
thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
That was
That's brilliant.
fabulous.
That's really
Definitely
wonderful.
been a pleasure. Yeah, definitely been. I'm so glad that you found it interesting.
Oh, gosh.
No, we
Yeah.
see
Very.
We'll get in touch via email.
Pardon? Text?
We'll keep in touch.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. Well, let's see. Some of you have my email already because we're already.
Yes.
Right.
Ralph-
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Ralph
The
knows-
program committee.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Great
So
job,
send me an
program
email,
committee.
I'll send you the,
Thank
I must confess, I have to look at that handout again to see, because I've changed the presentation a lot. Even getting ready for you guys, I changed it, I made a major change just yesterday. Well, not a major change, but a big change yesterday.
Oh,
Uh,
it's a
yeah,
change.
Great.
I have to look at the handout that I have and bring it up to date. And I think I'll put links into the blog posts for that particular person.
That would be great.
It's just brilliant.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. Boy.
Well, thank you so much for
Thank
this
you.
wonderful
Thank
evening.
you.
Thank you.
Anything.
Thank you. We
everybody.
hope to
Thank you.
see you again.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Right.
Bye.
All right.